Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this online talk from the Freer and Sackler galleries, which together comprise the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art. My name is Simon Rettig, and I am the assistant curator of Islamic art at the museum. Today, in this installment of our Tea and Conversation series, we are excited to offer you a glimpse at traditions, both cultural and culinary, of Nowruz, the Persian New Year festival. As we get started, feel free to take a moment to make yourself a cup of tea to enjoy along with the talk. As some of you may know, we normally host a festival at the museum each year for Nowruz. Unfortunately, we are not able to be together in person this year, but we are hosting an online celebration with talks, workshops, and video resources. So we encourage you to check out the program online. Today's program focuses on the culinary culture of Nowruz and the traditional food prepared around the holiday in Iran. And who could be better than a Persian chef to discuss this topic? I am delighted to have Omid Roustaei with us this evening. Omid is a psychotherapist, but also a trained chef and culinary instructor who is deeply passionate about sharing Persian culture and traditions through food and storytelling. Omid attended the School of Natural Cookery in Boulder, Colorado, and he teaches cooking classes, and he has a wonderful website with a blog called The Caspian Chef. He is based in Seattle, Washington State, and is joining us from his home there today. Welcome, Omid. Khosh Amadid. Omid will be sharing some of his extensive knowledge about Persian food traditions for Nowruz with us. And we will also bring in your questions for discussion after Omid's presentation. So please do add those to the Q&A box throughout the program. Before turning over to Omid, I would like to say a few words about Nowruz for those of you who may not be familiar with it. Nowruz in Persian means new day and signals the beginning of the new year. The festival starts on the day of the vernal equinox, which marks the arrival or the return of spring, the moment when the sun begins to regain strength and to overcome the cold and darkness of winter. Nowruz celebrates the rebirth of nature, and as such, it incorporates a lot of rituals and traditions, like cleaning the house, but also environment, going in processions to streams, waterways, lakes, or seas, gathering and partying and feasting with family and friends. This is a joyous holiday. Its origins are unclear, but it is part of the religious Zoroastrian ceremonies in ancient and pre-Islamic Iran. A monument of Persian literature and Iran's national epic, the Shahnameh or Book of Kings, composed by Firdausi and completed in the year 1010, informs us that the festival of Nowruz, starting on the first day of the month of Farvardin in the Iranian calendar, and was established by the mythical king Jamshid. We have the next slide, please. Yes. His reign, Jamshid's reign, lasted over 400 years. He introduced to his people the sciences, medicine, the arts, and crafts. He is also credited in the Shahnameh and other texts with the invention of sugar and wine. And Jamshid is depicted here in a wondrous painting belonging to the most sumptuous copy of the Shahnameh made for the Safavid ruler Shah Tahmasp. Jamshid, seated on his bejeweled throne and flanked by demons, he commands, looks over craftsmen sewing wood, casting iron, and cutting cloth. With his court, he is about to feast and rejoice, as all Iranians do during Nowruz. And now Omid is going to take us through some of the Nowruz traditions. Omid, this virtual floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Simon. It is such a privilege to be with you today and get to share this beautiful ancient holiday with you and everybody that has joined us. So as Simon informed us, this is an ancient tradition that started about 3,000 years ago, and to this day, Iranians celebrated deeply and soulfully. This is a ritual that starts a few days before the arrival of Nowruz by, as Simon called it, khane tekani, which we rub and scrub the houses down from floor to ceiling and clean and prepare for the arrival of Nowruz. And so a couple of days before the Nowruz, Iranians rush out to the streets and gather the ingredients that they need to set up their half-seen table. So I have, of course, set up my half-seen table, and I love to walk you through all the different elements and all the symbols and metaphors that it stands for. Through the, when you really think about it, at the core of it, it's about rebirth, renewal, rejuvenation, and beginning, new beginning. Nowruz means new day, and so here we are celebrating a new day of a new year. So on our slide, as you see, I have some of the items listed for the half-seen table. So what is half-seen? Haft is the word for 7, and seen is the reference to any the letter S in Farsi. So if you were to quickly count, you'll see there's a lot more than 7 listed there. So I think what once started at 7, the tradition just grows, and we add other items that also have metaphors and symbols for us. So I would like to give you an overview of my own half-seen table that I have set up here, and then walk you through each item one by one and quickly just tell you a little bit about the meanings of them. This is my half-seen table here in Seattle, Washington, where today it is looking quite spring-like, finally. It's been a dark, long winter, but here we are. So what I'd like to start off with, what's most meaningful to me, is sabze, because there is a ritual around growing it. It doesn't, you start this days before the arrival of Nowruz because you need to germinate it and allow the whether you use lentils or wheat or any other seeds or grain, it needs the time to grow. So sabze obviously represents the birth cycle in nature. And so that is a sabze that I will be honest and say I wasn't able to quite grow my sabze on time, and this is a purchased sabze. The next item I like to talk about is this item, which is a sumac powder. Sumac powder, as the color, beautiful maroon color, this represents sunrise and essentially symbolizing the tipping of the balance from the darkness to light. Another item over here is seke, or the word coin in Farsi, which represents wealth. This item here that looks like tea, but it's actually vinegar. Vinegar in Farsi is serke, which represents age and patience. This recognizable item is garlic, or in Farsi we call that sir. And sir represents health and medicine. This beautiful apple represents health and beauty in Persian culture and on the half-seen table. This one item back here, we call this senjed. And senjed is essentially a wild olive, sometimes called silverberries. They represent love. And the one item that I don't have on the table is it's called samanu, which is a sprouted wheat pudding. And that one represents, I think depending on which source you look it up, it could represent patience, because it really does take a long time to sprout the wheat and then cook it. Or also it represents the sweetness and endearing memories that this pudding represents. And as you will see on this spread, there are many other items, such as a hyacinth, which we call sombol, There's always a lit couple of candles and mirror reflecting light and reflection. And you can't have a Persian spread without sweets. So all sprinkled through my half-seen table, I have various traditional Persian sweets that are sprinkled all around. And some of the items that don't start with the letter S, such as a goldfish, represents fertility and birth. And one other item over here that also has the same significance is egg. Now, of course, these eggs sometimes, quite often, are ornately decorated or colored. I opted to keep mine simple for this year, as it just felt appropriate to keep things simple. So this is my half-seen table, and maybe it goes without saying that this is a marzipan goldfish. I have gotten out of the habit of buying goldfish. They just don't terribly have a good ending. So for years, I would use an iPad with a goldfish app until the iPad got old, and now I purchased this marzipan goldfish, which I will treasure for this holiday. So this is my half-seen table. And I will switch to some slides so that we can see some of the other traditional or contemporary half-seen tables that are set up in people's homes. So if we can go to the next slide. There we are. I had asked a few friends to send me all their half-seen tables, and these two I just really cherish because it just really celebrates simplicity, something that you don't often associate or see on a half-seen table. So I really was drawn to these two and inspired to somewhat make a simple half-seen table myself. Okay, now if we can go to the next slide, these are other friends that have graciously shared their half-seen table. You can see some of the familiar ingredients. Actually, if you look on the bottom left of the slide, there is that samanu, the sprouted wheat pudding. And on the right side of the slide, you see some of the traditional baked goods, which we call shirini in Farsi. And if we can go to the next slide, there's that beautiful sprout and some of these gorgeous, beautiful, ornate colored eggs that my friend had submitted for me to be able to use it on our slideshow today. And if we can go to the next slide. All right. So Nowruz traditions and stories. I think we can all tell a story about the Nowruz, whether we were young ones or how we celebrated as adults. Certainly as a kid, it is a beautiful time of the year because you get 13 days off from school, and it is the king of all holidays. So it starts at the vernal equinox, the arrival of the spring, and it lasts for 13 days until the 13th day, which we call Siz Devedar. We head outdoors and celebrate, which I'll describe in just a little bit. So as a kid, you get excited, you get brand new clothes, you get maybe fresh bills, crisp new bills as what we call AD. And now these days, as a grown-up, I celebrate Nowruz a little differently in that I take such pride and joy and to be part of this beautiful organization here in Seattle called Seattle-Isfahan Sister City Advocacy. And as the name implies, it is pretty straightforward. We are really just trying to bridge gaps, introduce beautiful people of Seattle to Isfahan and Isfahan to Seattle. And we hold a couple of very significant special events annually, which of course we hope to return back to normal once the pandemic is over. One item we do is called Chefs Without Borders, which we work with chefs in Iran and chefs in Seattle rather, that we simultaneously cook each other's food and get to celebrate each other's cuisine. And the biggest celebration that we have, which we are all so eagerly looking forward to next year, is when we essentially take over Seattle City Hall and invite about 2,000 to 3,000 people to come to see performances, to see art, to see crafts, to see speeches, all of our beautiful local, there's the delightful dancers. Local officials take part and support the Iranian community in ways that we celebrate Nowruz. So there are children, there are elderlies, there are just a variety of different programs that essentially speaks to every generation. And if we can maybe forward to the next slide, and there we are, some beautiful art and crafts, and there are various booths that showcase different organizations, different events, and essentially it's a great introduction. If you're new to Persian culture, it's a great introduction to meeting Iranians and seeing how Iranians celebrate their ancient holiday. So if we can fast forward to the next slide. And I think this is where Simon will take over for us.
Yes, continuing with like Nowruz tradition. Yesterday was Shahnameh Suri, which is today is the last Wednesday of the year. And on Shahnameh Suri, bonfires are lit outside and in public spaces, and people leap over the flames, chanting the verse. What is the verse in Persian, Omid, that we chant for?
Zardi man az to, surkhi to az man.
Which roughly translate by give me your beautiful red color and take back my sickly paler, something like that. It's a jumping over fire. It's a symbolic cleansing by fire. And here I show you a painting which is way much more dramatic, and don't do that. It's a Prince Siavosh and his ordeal by fire. It's a story in the Shahnameh again. It's like falsely accused by his stepmother Sudabeh of being the aggressor after he rejected her amorous advances. So the young prince insisted upon undergoing ordeal by fire. And if I show you this depiction of Siavush here, it's also because Siavush appears through another popular character of Nowruz, and that is Haji Firuz. You meet Haji Firuz in streets in the days preceding Nowruz, and they sing usually traditional songs, dance, play tambourine, often for a few coins. And Haji Firuz usually wears red, which is the color associated with Siavush. Do you have memories of Haji Firuz in Iran, Omid?
Absolutely. As we imagine Santa Claus coming down the chimneys, we had Haji Firuz with a tambourine dancing in the streets, and just that's essentially the feeling that gets evoked right around the holiday. You get to hear the sounds of Nowruz and the sights and this aromas of Nowruz. But the primary thing was the Haji Firuz dancing in the streets when you were preparing for Nowruz.
And as you mentioned, and as we can see in the next slide, that's maybe not, but possibly a representation of Sizde Bedar. So the last day of Nowruz, the outing day, when every family gets out, finds a spot in a park or a garden, preferably along a stream, in which they throw the plate of sabze away, the one that you showed us on your table. And families and friends, like, they spread a carpet on the ground and they spend the day, as it is shown here in this Safavid painting, They play chess or backgammon. They sing, they dance, they chat, and they listen to music. And of course, they're feasting with elaborate meals, large quantities of fruits and sweets. And talking about fruit and sweets, that as we see in the next slide, which is not a painting for once, but a wonderful photograph with Nasiruddin Shah Qajar in one of the small rooms of the Golestan, and he's behind that table, that amazing table, filled, covered with like fruits, and you can see the apples at the back, pomegranates at the front, dried fruits and nuts also at the front of the tables, and a lot of sweets, traditional sweets at the back. And there are many varieties of sweets made for Nowruz, right, Omid?
That's right. That's right.
And so you see that with photographs like that taken at the end of the 19th century, the traditions like go way back in time, and are just not something that was invented recently.
Right.
And the next slide, please. Yes. And food and cooking play an important role in every culture. But I think, and I'm probably not the only one to think that, more than anywhere else, there are fundamental elements of the identity of Iranians. Persian cuisine has its roots deep in time, but also deep in the land itself, from which a subtle taste developed and intricate savors were elaborated. And Persian cuisine has been celebrated by poets and often translated into images, such as this one, a cooking scene from the poem Jamshid o Khorshid by Salman Savaji, so back to the mid-14th century. And here it's a full-page painting in a 17th century Safavid copy, where you see the man in the foreground, like chopping what looks like onions, the other one coming with the plate to get them, and like the two others, like the cook, the chef, the old man you see at the back, like cooking in that large cauldrons, like a delicious meal. And with the next slide, before listening to Omid presenting Persian food traditions, and especially for Nowruz, I briefly show you a detail of an illustration of the story of Khosrow and Shirin and the fishmonger from Jami's After Orang, so the Seven Thrones. It's a wonderful manuscript which is kept in the Freer Gallery of Art. And it's a wonderful introduction to Omid's recipes because you can see the fish in front of Khosrow and Shirin in the foreground above the watermelons. And on the left, you have that man, presenting what looks like a plate with polo, so cooked rice. The two ingredients that are used to make sabzi polo ba mahi, which Omid is going to introduce now.
Beautiful. Yes, I'm getting hungry. All of this talk of food. So if we move to the next slide, I'll just talk just a touch about Persian food and Persian cuisine. About a few years ago, I really found it necessary for myself to just choose to be teaching Persian class at a whole different level. It became a mission for me to spread understanding of Persian cuisine, and by doing so, allowing people to learn who we are as Iranians and learn more about our culture. So here's me teaching back in the good old days where you could actually go to a place to teach. Now all classes are online, but you can see how elaborate the setup is, where I would line up the spices and put various cookbooks and demonstrate to people the love and the care that goes into Persian food. So what is Persian food? You know, most of us, maybe some of us know what Persian food is, but maybe some people don't know what Persian food is. How I always think about it is, it's just a perfect blending of herbs and spices and a playful dance of flavors between salt, sweet, sour, and bitter. So I always think that, you know, Persian food is not sweet and sour, but there's always an element of sweet and there's always an element of sour. Now, the sweet and sour often get caught in a dance with one another, and I think ultimately the sour leads and the sweet follow. So that's how I always think about it. And one very perhaps romantic way I describe Persian food is like you've seen a Persian rug, and Persian food is much like a Persian rug. They have so many things in common. They have the complexity, the texture, the balance, design, color, and above all, patience and love that are part of both of these medias. So Persian food is very healthy. We use herbs like you would use vegetables. Often when I teach a Persian class and folks get their shopping list, they're bewildered at the amount of herbs that they have to buy that we would use just for one dish. So herbs, as we talked about, is a symbol of life, is a symbol of health, a rebirth, and we use it tremendously in our culture. So perhaps a couple of clarifications on Persian food. Sometimes people think everything takes forever to cook, while certainly we have dishes that take a long time, but there are also dishes that can be more or less prepared in about half hour, which I will demonstrate. Well, I won't demonstrate, but I will show you the prepared frittata cuckoo style. And another misconception that folks have is that though we do use spices, not everything is spicy. Some of the classic Persian dishes just use salt, pepper, turmeric. Like it's really could be that simple. And we don't use spices to the point where our palates burn and hurt. So our dishes, though have spices, they're never spicy hot. So if we can switch to the next slide, here we are. So here's sabzi polo mahi, which is a traditional dish that Iranians eat the night before the New Year. So New Year's Eve, all Iranians are gathering their herbs, soaking the rice, and perfecting their tadig, which is that crispy golden crust that you see on the rice. And then a fish that is selected. Typically, we like a white flesh fish. So I've used branzino, sea bream, trout, various white flesh fish that gets coated with salt, pepper, and turmeric and gets fried and decoratively placed on top of this platter. That is a New Year's Eve dish. So if we can go to the next slide. This one is kuku sabzi. Kuku is a word we use to refer to frittata in Italian, tortilla in Spanish. So essentially an egg-based dish, but the difference between kuku and let's say frittata is that particularly when it comes to kuku sabzi, it's not about the eggs, it's about the herbs. So if you make a kuku sabzi that you can actually see too many eggs, that will tell you that you probably used one or too many eggs. So it's just the eggs are to bind the herbs together. So kuku sabzi can be eaten anytime during the Nowruz holiday. Many folks will have it on the New Year's Eve as well. In the slide that I have right here in front of you, I have baked them, though traditionally they are pan-fried. And tonight, the one that I'm actually going to show you, I did pan-fry it, so you get to see a little difference. So with the next slide, this is ashe reshte, which is a very hearty beans, herbs, and noodle soup. amongst many ingredients that goes into this hearty soup. But the significance of this, and I call it a soup, it's not actually a soup, it's a very thick soup. Maybe that's a word to use. What this dish symbolizes and highlights is the role that noodles play and the references and the metaphors around noodle. So the idea is that by eating the noodles that are no longer that they've unraveled, that you've removed the knots, and that your path ahead, the year ahead, would be free of knots and be smooth sailing, so to speak. So that is one dish that, depending on who you ask, you eat at different time of the new year. I most associated with Sizdah Bedar toward the end of the holiday, where folks will make this and take it to their picnic, while some people will have it at the beginning of the new year. But these are the three primary dishes that Iranians eat as part of the welcoming and celebrating and starting the Persian New Year. I have, if we can go to the next slide, I have bunches of pictures put for you to whet your appetite for some Persian food and kind of to showcase part of how I try to demonstrate Persian food and what I'm really trying to do with what I can. There's something so incredibly endearing and beautiful about communal eating. So it is very traditional for Iranians to gather around what we call a sofre, a spread, and trays of rice and meat and yogurts and pickled vegetables and fresh herbs are just spread on this sofre, and it's really wonderful. However, I think for Iranians that's familiar and that's very endearing. For non-Iranians, that might seem a little, I don't know, maybe difficult or not easy to arrive to. So what I hope to do is to take the DNA of Persian food and just change it a little bit, upgrade it a little bit, instead of making it family style, plated in such a way where it's not vast amounts of food that might scare people. So the dish on the left you'll see is a very traditional Persian rice and lentil dish called adas polo. I've tweaked it up a little bit. I changed it a little bit. I got really lucky when I put the hard-boiled egg in there, and when I cut it in half, it cut perfectly, which made for a really great photo. On the bottom right, there is a stuffed fish from the Caspian Sea, and on the top right is a very traditional eggplant and lamb with tomato stew. If we can go to the next slide. On the top right, it's actually that frittata, except I, again, try to update it a little bit. I cut it into paisley shape, which is a traditional paisley design, Iranian design. On the bottom is a dish from western side of the country where it is in green herb sauce with tamarind and a lot of fire and heat, unlike other parts of the country. And the main picture is wedges of lettuce, which is just so brilliantly simple and extraordinary that you dip it into a what we call sekanjebin, which is a mint and vinegar syrup. Sounds a little strange, and I have just witnessed feeding this to people and just watch their eyes open up. So that's another simple appetizer type. Next slide. So stuffed chicken is, as we call shikampor, is a concept in many cuisines, including Persian food. What's fun about this stuffed chicken is it's stuffed with fruit. So there's layers of, I think I had Granny Smith apples in that one, apricots, raisins, and walnuts. And the chicken, as it gets cooked whole, gets brushed with saffron. The top picture is another herb rice dish. It is gishniz polo, which is cilantro rice. And the bottom right is a very, I often talk about it as like I feel mischievous eating it because it feels like I'm eating dessert. It is rice layered with sour cherries and what we call qelqeli, small little meatballs. So we can Go to the next slide. Beautiful. And here's another example of just taking a very traditional dish and just giving it a little twist. That is a traditional Shevit Polo on the left. That is dill and rice with what I once again attempted to cut paisley-shaped tadig, that crispy rice. I now have an X-Acto knife for cooking that I carved out the tadig with it, which is layered outside on with a tortilla and caramelized onion. Tortilla, not traditional, nonetheless. Top right is a what we call megu polo. It is prawns and rice with herbs. And down on the bottom is another version of that eggplant and tomato stew. Khoresh badem jun. I know a good friend of mine that is here, and that is her absolute favorite dish. And once again, being absolutely playful, nothing traditional about the presentation of Persian food in hamburger style, but this is exactly the same dish as we had talked about a little earlier. This is adas polo, the lentil and rice dish, except I cooked the rice in little ramekins and created a crust, a tadig crust, and with the lentils rather, I made burgers and stacked them up, and they are actually small sizes that you can hold. I mean, it's not the easiest thing, but nonetheless, it is one to be able to have it as a slider. On the bottom right, one of the most cherished Persian dishes we call fesenjun. It is chicken or duck cooked in a delightful, delicious pomegranate and walnut sauce, and one of the most difficult food to photograph. So you have to put it against the white background to actually show. And that one on the top, it is a simple and humble dish from where my parents are from. By the shores of the Caspian Sea, from the city of Boulder. That is a local dish we call mella ghorme, which is essentially eggplants and tomatoes. You see those two show up in a lot of our dishes. And what's unique about Northern Iranian food is that they tend to be plant heavy, plant forward, and the protein often comes from beans or eggs. And the next dish, or rather slide, sorry, here we are. And so we're going to wrap it up here with the sweets. The top left is a Persian love cake. It is a delightfully moist almond flour cake flavored with traditional spices such as cardamom, lemon zest, and of course, rose water. On the bottom left is Persian baklava, which is a little different than other regions of baklava. Iranian baklava has rose water and cardamom and is not typically as syrupy and sticky. And the picture on the right is one of my all-time favorite, I don't even know if I call it dessert, but nonetheless, it is a rice pudding. It is a saffron and rose water rice pudding that ultimately brings such deep, fond memories of being a child in Iran and remembering my Amma Azar making it for us as kids. And these puddings weren't made for a little tiny bit after dinner, but rather she had this large pot that she would cook this in, and this is a type of food that you make a wish, you make a blessing, and you serve it to your neighbors and friends and family. So that is the end of the slides. And so now I can go ahead and show you my pictures that I have, if I can get my camera turned on. So here is the sabzi polo ba mahi. As you can see, the rice is cooked with varying amounts. And I think each household has their own preference on how much herbs they use. My preference always is for more on the dill, a little bit cilantro, a little bit parsley, some chives, and a small amount of fenugreek. Fenugreek, for most of us in the US, is a little hard to obtain fresh, but we can easily access and get some dried. And a little bit goes very far. It's one of those herbs that just adds that kick, that punch, that really umami feeling of a flavor. So the fish is simply coated with salt, pepper, turmeric, and fried. And this dish traditionally is served with Seville oranges, which I wish I had, and these are good old regular variety of orange at this point, as well as Persian pickled garlic. The legends say that it needs to preserve and pickle for 7 years. I have a jar that is working its way through, I think its 4th year at this time. So this is sabzi polo ba mahi. And this other dish is another, it is the cuckoo sabzi, which is once again a medley of dill, parsley, cilantro, chives, and I choose to put the fenugreek. Again, fenugreek is a little bit on the optional side and or accessibility. What I love about the cuckoo is that it's really fresh. It is healthy, and given that when we fry it, the color of the herbs changes to a little darker green, then we add these beautiful Persian berries in Farsi we call zeresh, or barberries in English, that I sprinkle some on the inside and some on the top, as well as a round of walnuts, radishes, and more fresh herbs. This often is served either with bread or with simple white rice. So these are the creations that I have presented. I wanted to present to you as showcasing what I will be eating for dinner tonight, as well as preparation for the Persian New Year. So with that, I will hand it over to Simon to continue on with our slides.
Yes. I am starving now, Omid. I think yes. I think I will prepare cuckoo sabzi tonight.
Oh, good, good.
As it's one of my favorites, also.
Brilliant.
And what I loved in your presentation also is the importance of presenting, the dishes. And I thought I would show a few photographs and objects which testifies to the importance of wares and service plates for presenting the dishes. And with in our archives collections at the Freer and Sackler, we have a large amount of photographs from Qajar, Iran. And some of them, like this one, are photographs of Qajar, Nowruz festivities in the time of Nasiruddin Shah Qajar. And that's for instance, this one, that's part of the Salam Tahvil, so the greeting for the turn of the year, which was held every year at the Golestan Palace. And you have to imagine that on the left, you have the hall with the marble throne, and Nasiruddin Shah seated on it, and each, dignitaries, foreign ambassadors come and greet the Shah, but then it was also open to the public. And what's interesting on the picture is that you see behind the standing minister, and Isaac Qajar, because he wears a terme robe. Only Qajars could wear terme robes, and they would be bestowed by the Shah himself on the occasion of Nowruz to the dignitaries. But behind him, you see these large bowls, that are set on the floor, and in which like food is going to be served, presented there in them thereafter. And with the next slide, you actually see the setting at a table, not in the palace itself. You see you're outdoor, under a tent, and you're directly on the ground, on a souffle, on a carpet. What's interesting here is that you notice that you don't eat in a dinner plate, but in a soup plate or a bowl, and that each meals or dishes are served separately in large containers or small containers, large plates that you see at the back, with the rice, and the small bowls, small cups in which you put the various things that then you mix in your plate. And with the next slide, that that led to the development over the centuries in Iran to specific types of wares. Here, you have bowls from the 14th century, and large plates. So these are service plates. They're not. You don't eat directly in those plates. They were for serving. But the one at the top, the green one, the celadon-like one, is very large. And all those were developed over the centuries, and made specifically to serve Persian dishes. And you will note also the different types of decorations. That was very important to eat in very nice in very nice and with elaborated decorations, plates and dishes. And finally, to conclude the presentation, another table a bit more elaborated because it's in the palace. So with these men, gathered and waiting basically for the dinner to be served. And I think I'm ready also to sit down and feast now. And thank you so much, Omid, for that enlightening and mouth-watering presentation. I think at this point I would like to open up the discussion for questions, and we received quite a lot of questions. You answered some already. What are the herbs in the kuku sabzi, for instance? But someone is asking, what does tadig mean?
Oh, tadig. Tadig is a literal translation. Ta is bottom, dig is a pot. So tadig means the stuff that happens in the bottom of the pot. And I think the story behind tadig is that you cook the rice over flame, the water evaporates and the stuff crisps up on the bottom, and so it naturally develops. But then we learn to perfect that art of crispiness. So now we add saffron, now we add oil. Now, of course, we have sometimes Teflon pans that we're able to really go out of our way to make sure this crispy tadig is as crispy as it can be. And as children and as adults, that's the stuff that we all fight over to get as much as we can and get our hands on. So if you're new to tadig, when I teach classes, I always tell people, the first time you make Persian rice, it's your learning curve. You will learn the next time whether you need to have the flame a little higher or maybe to have the flame a little lower. But the first time is a good practice, and that is tadig.
So it takes a lot of practice to
at least one trial, at least one trial. But I always say tadig has a mind of its own. Every time is going to be just a little different. So I've learned to appreciate a little on the extra crispy and a little on the less pale, more pale side of it. But ultimately, it really depends where you put the flame and how big the pot is and what source of fire you're using. So there are many different elements, but once you get it, you get it.
Great. Another question about some recipe. What could be substituted for the kashk in the Omid Roustaei if one is eating plant-based?
Yes.
So kashk translates by, what is kashk?
Kashk is often people call it liquid whey, and it may get confusing as to the liquid that separates from the yogurt. That's whey as well, except kashk is cooked yogurt that is salted and rehydrated. So it's actually quite a process, simple enough, but it's a process. If you're eliminating kashk and you want to stay plant-based, I mean, I can go down many different paths. One, you could absolutely just eliminate it because the stew is pretty flavorful on its own. Or one of the things I like to do is I like cashews a lot. So I will put the cashews in a blender with some water. You can add some lemon juice to it. And so that creates that creamy tart substance that essentially what kashk is. Of course, you would add a little salt because kashk is salty too. So that would be an equivalent of a plant-based kashk that you can drizzle into your Persian ashes.
Another question, interesting one. I mean, there are several questions in this. Are all these dishes eaten at room temperature? Are they eaten every day during the 2 weeks of celebration? I ask, and that's the person, I ask because this relates to East Asian traditions for celebrating the New Year.
Well, the room temperature, I think today I'm presenting it at room temperature because I had to prepare for it. Not necessarily room temperature, but there is a concept in Persian food that we call jabi ofte. The food needs to settle a little bit. So you would never cook a stew hot and pour it into a bowl and serve it. You turn it off, you let it sit for 5-10 minutes, and that's when the soup or the stew is ready to be served. So it is a little cooler, but it's not room temperature. Would you eat this every day during the whole duration of Nowruz? No, I wouldn't say so. I think there is sabzi polo is New Year's Eve. My tradition would be like I would eat asher reshte on 13 bedar and kuku sabzi, sprinkle it somewhere in the middle. So it isn't like you would just eat it repeatedly. It's just that you would at least have it once during this period of celebration.
And it depends of like your family traditions, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure you can do that, but let's see. Can you comment on any theories as to why some cultures celebrate spring with a whole lamb, but Persian cuisine seems to emphasize stewed preparations?
I missed the first part of it. Could you say that again, Simon, please?
Some culture, like Christianity, usually for Easter, a lamb is served.
Yes.
And it's a whole lamb, I guess. It's roasted lamb, as it's like. But that person says like Persian cuisine seems to emphasize stewed preparations, or maybe not meat for Nowruz.
Yeah, interesting. It isn't. Well, I think we prioritize fish because it's the metaphor of water and birth and life, which is much more meaningful associated with the meanings associated with Nowruz. But that doesn't mean that we don't also eat beef or lamb. As a matter of fact, lamb is used quite a bit in Persian cuisine, as is beef or chicken. So the dishes associated with Nowruz tend to be closer to fish and eggs rather than lamb and other animal food.
That's a perfect answer, I think. What kind of oil and fat is used in traditional Persian cooking?
So, butter is used, ghee is used. There is a more of a like a solid fat. In Western culture, we call that lard. So lard comes from pig, except in Iran, we would use an equivalent of lard from sheep. There is a specific oil called Rogan Kermanshahi, which is a fat from the sheep that grow in the city of Kermanshah, which is, I have to tell you, Simon, that I think after about 30, 40 years, I was able to purchase a jar of it online, and I open it and I cook with it. It transports me. It is so powerfully familiar and nostalgia inducing that I have literally keep it in the fridge, and on very special occasions pull it out and use it. So those are some of the fat that you would use. And I say this in my cooking classes all the time. Sadly, much like the rest of the world, these terribly processed vegetable oils, or oils that I wouldn't necessarily have any flavor or characteristics, they are used quite a bit too for preparing some of the food. But when I cook for myself, I tend to use butter, ghee, olive oil, grapeseed oil, and my precious Rogan Kermanshahi that I keep for special occasions.
Well, that gives a unique flavor to the plate, and that brings me to a question asked by let me check. Oh, I think I lost it. Oh no, it's here. It's about Iranian saffron has a unique taste. But when you can't find ingredients from Iran, can you substitute them? Always find a substitution here, like the Rex, and then you would use cranberries, but it won't taste the same.
No. So I think I'm all for substitution and adapting. I rather you ate Persian food and explore Persian food with what's accessible and available to you than to get discouraged and not try it because you can't find the ingredients. So I'm always encouraging people to try that. With that said, some things make sense, some things don't make sense. The one thing about barberries and cranberries, they have berry in common, but they're nothing alike. Sadly, and often the cranberries we buy is sweet. And that is not something that is ever going to work in lieu of barberries. Barberries we use because of their tart flavor. So I was teaching a class once, and they didn't have whatever the circumstance was, I needed the cranberries that were not sweetened. So out of necessity, I just simmered them in some lime juice just to take the sugar away so that I can actually use it in my dish. So there are ways that you can adapt, and I'm always for it, and I'm encouraging it. Some things make a little more sense. Sometimes things don't make more sense. So in terms of saffron, what's a good source? Where do you get saffron? I'd say my mother is the best source of saffron. Because my refrigerator is stacked up, because every time she goes back to Iran, she asks, Omid June, what would you like from Iran? And I would say, barberries and saffron, Mother June. So I tend to have a lot of saffron stashed away, but silliness aside, it is hard to find Iranian saffron. I mean, because of the political situations and sanctions and such. So it's not always easy to get some of the Iranian products that we want. You can absolutely purchase them online. You can go to your Persian markets. I think much like everything else, sometimes you get a good product, sometimes you may not get a good product. I'd rather you use an explored saffron than to say, well, I don't know if this is authentic or not, and not even try. So that's typically my approach.
Yeah, perfect approach, I think. So this program is coming to an end, and it might be a good time to switch from tea to wine with a wonderful last slide, a wonderful drawing by the celebrated Safavid artist Riza Abbasi, where you see the cupbearers, filling these very nice bottles with those big jars full of good Persian wine. Thank you again, Omid, for sharing your knowledge of Persian cuisine, your recipes and family memories also with us. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I hope you discovered something new about Persian food and Nowruz traditions. You can visit our website, asia.si.edu, or follow us on social media for information about upcoming events. You can also go on the Caspian Chef website for recipes, right? You have all your recipes on the website. So yes. Happy Nowruz to all. Nowruz shoma mubarak bashad.
Nowruz shoma mubarak bashad. Simon June.
I hope you have a joyous celebration wherever you are with your family, if you are celebrating the holiday. Stay safe, and we look forward to welcoming you back to the museum soon. Goodbye.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.